Today we're going to be looking at a few of the readings from Southeast Asia, and then we're going to move on and talk about Canada. Now, since this is supposed to be a literature discussion, and I can't really get a discussion from you, I'm going to talk briefly about the short readings, and then I will have a question for each topic we discussed today. So the first one is about Anna Leonowens, who is of Anna and the King, or the King and I fame. And we will talk about her again in another class, in another semester. But for now, she came and she worked with Rama 4. She taught Rama 5. But the clip that we have here, the selection we have here, is when she first meets the king's harem. Okay, the harem is all of the king's wives and concubines. All right, that's why she calls it His Excellency's Private Utah at the bottom of the page. Utah is Mormon, and the Mormons were famous for having many wives. That's what the reference was that she was making. Okay, it's probably not something you would have picked up on. That's why I'm explaining it. All right, and then she meets an older lady who tells her her life story. She says this lady is very ugly, but then after she tells her story, she says, here, with the end of her soiled silk scarf, she furtively wipes a tear from her face, no longer ugly. Okay, so my question is, why was the old woman no longer ugly? All right, so answer that question, and we are going to move on to the second reading. Okay, the second reading is called A Hanging. It's in a book by George Orwell. George Orwell is the author of 1984 and Animal Farm. Those are his most famous works. But before that, he was a policeman working in Burma. Once again, this is another story we're going to see in another class in another semester, Shooting an Elephant. However, for this class, one of the essays contained in Shooting an Elephant and other essays is A Hanging. And so, the story of A Hanging is going to tell the story about a Indian guy in Burma being hung by Indian police in Burma, being oversaw by European administrators in Burma. Okay, so the Burmese aren't even concerned at all, which kind of shows a bit about the imperialism that's going on. This is happening in Burma, but it has really nothing to do with Burma whatsoever. It might as well have been happening in India. All right, but that's because Burma was a colony of India. I know that's strange because India was a colony of Britain, but Burma was a colony of British India. Okay, it was made a colony of a colony. And so because of that, there was many Indians that were also living in Burma at that time. All right, so you should go watch the short clip about discussing this reading. Now pause this and go watch the short clip right now. And this is a movie. I could not find this movie, but it's not about the story that we are reading. All right, so my question about this reading is this. It's kind of a tricky question. What was the convicted man's crime? Okay, the guy that got hung or hanged, what is his crime? All right. Now we're going to move on to everybody's favorite topic, Canada. All right, there's a show on Netflix called Frontier. I watched it all now. I can't say I really recommend it. It's just kind of a weird show. But in any case, it's about Canada in the late 1700s, right after the American Revolution, kind of. But actually, the timeline's not great. But that's the time period. It's talking about British Canada, which is why we're talking about Canada today, because it was indeed British. Canada was an integral part of Britain's world empire, and the Canadians were British subjects and proud of it. Well, most of them. Okay, the French that lived in Canada didn't really feel that kind of connection. All right, so why are the French and British in Canada? Well, pause this video now and go watch the second link that we have about the history of Canada. Okay, it's about a 10-minute history, so go watch that and then come back and we'll finish this class up. Alright, so as we saw in the video, about 90% of the population was British. Okay, and the overwhelming bulk of Canadians' population, particularly the controlling elite, felt themselves British through and through. Okay, they were proud to be part of the empire for a long time. Canada will be granted its not really independence. It's not really an Independence Day. They didn't fight a war, and they weren't fully independent after this, but they call it Canada Day on July 1st, 1867. Okay, and so now they can elect this guy, but they still have her on their money. Okay, but July 1st is Canada Day. They don't have an Independence Day because, yeah. Alright, so the thing about Canadian Western migration was that it was kind of the opposite of American migration, United States migration. In the United States, think of Old West. The Old West and Westerns, the Wild West, that whole image is because the people moved out before the law moved out. Okay, there was no government. That's why they had the swaggering town sheriff and fighting against the outlaws, because there wasn't government around to enforce the laws other than the one guy, the sheriff. All right, in Canada, it was the opposite. The law came out first. The law is going to establish, with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they're going to establish order, and then the population is going to start to fill in the land. All right, how did they establish order? Well, first they had to get rid of the people that are living there. And to do that, they're going to commit genocide and cultural genocide. Cultural genocide is where they, just like we saw with the Australians and the Aborigines, they take children from their parents and send them to schools. Okay, America did this for a short time at least, as well with the American Indians. All right, and that's pretty much the point here. The Canadians did pretty much everything that the Americans did to the Indians. However, the Canadians seem to not ever have to own up to the fact. Okay, the idea of Canadians is that they are so sweet and nice and say sorry all the time. This meme here, someone stepped on my foot, I forgot to say sorry, so sad. Okay, but this is really more my experience, not my grammar though. I just found this on the internet. I am also not Canadian, I want to be clear about that. Yeah, they don't really own up to their history. Alright, so the last major event that we're going to talk about with Canada is the Alaska boundary dispute. There's gold found up in the Yukon Territory in the 1890s. Yukon Territory was split between the United States and Canada. Well, the Yukon Territory itself was part of Canada, but the Yukon area, I guess I should say, so Yukon Territory is like an actual political unit. Yukon area also included parts of Alaska. All right, so because of this, Alaska and Canada are going to have a boundary dispute. They're going to be arguing about where the border is. All right, so at this time, in the early 1900s, when this becomes a big issue, the president of the United States is Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt's not going to back down from Canada. And so Roosevelt sends troops into the region. And the Canadians are like, whoa there, big fella. Let's talk this through. So they invite a British representative to come, and he's going to oversee this arbitration tribunal. Okay, 3 Americans, 2 Canadians, and 1 British. Okay, the British guy was supposed to be on the Canadian side, but instead what happens is the British side with the Americans, and the Canadians kind of feel betrayed by this. Okay, because the Canadians see themselves as proud British subjects, but the representative from Britain is going to side with the Americans and give all this land to America instead of deciding giving it with Canada. But there's still going to be one last time where the Canadians get to be very British. Okay, and that is in World War I. As we saw in the video, in World War I, the Canadians are going to send 625,000 troops. Okay, first of all, that's a huge number for such a tiny population. Second of all, they're going to suffer enormous casualties. Okay, they're going to have over 10% dead, and more than a quarter are going to be wounded. Okay, that's enormous casualties for a battle. Okay, for a war. Generally, for a war or any particular battle, you would expect to suffer maybe 1 to 2% casualties, sometimes up to 5. But what's going to happen here is just an enormous amount. Okay, and after this, the Canadians are going to feel like they've earned their place in the world order. Canada's going to join the League of Nations independently of Britain, okay, meaning Britain's not going to represent them in the League of Nations. And in 1931 statute, Westminster affirms Canada's independence. Okay, so if you're looking for when Canada became independence, okay, remember Canada Day was celebrated from long before this. So that wasn't really their Independence Day. But they were self-governing, sort of, and they were self-governing democracy at that time. But Canada just kind of wandered its way into independence. Okay, there wasn't like a set revolutionary period. There was no war. There was no treaty. Okay, it was just kind of like they joined the League of Nations, and then in 1931, the Parliament's like, yeah, I guess you guys are independent. So, because of that, you need to pay close attention to the video that we watched, or also I mentioned in the lecture. Okay, what act made Canada a self-governing democracy? What act made Canada a self-governing democracy? So that's your third question for today. And in fact, that's the whole class. All right, so any questions you have, please put them in the line group. Oh yeah, and don't forget to do your poems for next week.